Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolina Democrats need to flip just one seat in the state Senate next year to give Democratic Governor Josh Stein more veto power. Republicans hold a veto-proof majority in the chamber. Whether the GOP keeps that power could come down to a few key 2026 races. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been following those races, and he joins us now. Will, good to see you.
Nice to talk to you again.
Will, the midterms are still well over a year away, but you report that there are a few races already kind of heating up. Why now and why so far out?
Well, this is big money that we're talking here. You know, state lawmakers only make $13,000 a year, but it costs millions of dollars to win one of these very few competitive seats that exist in the state. So they need to get started right now, getting their name out there, raising money, talking to people. And, you know, this all comes down to protecting the governor's veto power. Like you mentioned, he's already used that veto on a lot of things just this session, and Democrats are very keen on making sure that they are well positioned to protect that for the second half of his first term in office.
Now, you reported on the battle for a seat in Rocky Mount, or in and around Nash County. Who are the players there, and why is that seen as such a close one?
Yes, this is a seat in Nash, Franklin, and Vance counties, so basically just to the east and north of Raleigh. And it's currently held by Republican State Senator Lisa Barnes, who's been in office for the better part of a decade. I think she'd be running for her fourth or fifth term. And on paper, this is a seat Democrats should be winning. You know, if you look at the 2026 and 2020 presidential elections, it leans Democratic, at least in presidential races. But Barnes has managed to win this seat, and Democrats think that they have a good challenger against her now, a local pastor named James Galliard. That name might be familiar to people from the area. He used to be in the state House of Representatives. He lost that seat in 2022 to a Republican, but he is now seeking to make a political comeback. And I was out at his kickoff party in Rocky Mount, and I mean, some really powerful people from the state Democratic Party were there. State Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls introduced him. You know, the top Senate Democrat, Sidney Batch, gave a big speech after he spoke, telling people exactly how many millions of dollars they're going to need to win this race. So they're really pinning a lot of their hopes on him being able to flip that seat that Lisa Barnes has held for many years now.
So what do they need to do differently other than just raise money? What's Galliard really kind of pushing as his priorities?
They're trying to change their messaging. I talked to him about this at his kickoff, and he said, look, I think we've all learned this lesson, you know, from the past few election cycles. A kind of message that works with voters in Durham is not going to work in Rocky Mount. You know, Democrats need to have a bigger tent and, you know, maybe not get bogged down in some of the culture war issues or more social, progressive issues that some Democrats want to talk about, and just really focus on pocketbook issues. And so that's really going to be his message, focusing on income inequality, because this is a rural area of the state, you know, formerly, you know, really heavily dependent on tobacco, which obviously has, you know, taken a downturn in the last couple of decades. And, they really need a shot in the arm for the economy out in rural North Carolina. And that is going to be the message that he tries to campaign on.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about how Republicans plan to tackle legislative races in 2026. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the 2026 elections. Will, you spoke with Republican operatives about the race out in Rocky Mount. How are they approaching this race?
They say, look, you know, James Galliard might want to just focus on these economic issues and stay away from social things, but he has got a long track record of votes and floor speeches and other actions when he was in the legislature talking about critical race theory and DEI and all sorts of things like that, you know, even if he's, you know, trying to kind of stay away from those issues now, he's still got to answer to voters for him. So they think that they've got some good ammunition if he does turn out to be the Democratic nominee for that seat, which he probably will be, to go after him. And meanwhile, they say, look, our own candidates are well known in that area. Lisa Barnes is from a very prominent farming family. We've reported that, you know, the family farm is actually in receivership right now. It defaulted on about $40 million in loans. That's tied up in a legal battle. Obviously, like I was saying, farming is entering a tough stretch economically in North Carolina. But the family is well known, she's well known, and so they think that they've got good candidates that can hold off Democrats in these competitive seats that are out there.
Now, as we mentioned, Democrats just need to pick up one seat in the Senate to break that veto-proof majority. So if they don't pick it up in that Rocky Mount district, there are a couple other races that could be in play, right? Tell us about those.
There are. So we have 50 Senate seats here in North Carolina, and there's 5, maybe 6 of them that are competitive. All of the rest are pretty much guaranteed to go either Republican or Democrat. But there's a handful of toss-up districts that could go either way. You've got that Rocky Mount seat. There's a seat in Wilmington that's held by Senate Majority Leader Michael Lee that's pretty close. New Hanover is actually a blue county, but Republicans have drawn that seat to kind of carve out some of the more historically black neighborhoods of Wilmington, put them in a different district. And so Lee has been able to hold on in that district even as the county as a whole has shifted blue. But Democrats will definitely be coming after him again this year. There's also a seat in the northern Wake County suburbs around Wake Forest that then stretches up into Granville County on the Virginia border that's held by a Democrat, Terrence Everett. And he won that seat by only 128 votes in 2024. So even though everyone does expect the midterms in 2026 to be favorable to Democrats, Republicans still see that as a potential flip for them that, say, okay, even if it's a rough year for us and, we do lose one of these seats in Rocky Mount or Wilmington or, a handful of other competitive places, maybe we can flip back that, Wake County seat and protect our supermajority. So there's a lot of considerations that go into all of this. But at the end of the day, there's only maybe half a dozen, maybe not even that many of the 50 Senate seats that are competitive. So those competitive races are going to draw tons of attention, tons of money to them.
Now, you've said that 2026 could be a bad year for Republicans. Why is that?
Well, historically in the U.S., the party that controls the White House does poorly in the midterms. In 2022, when Joe Biden was president, Republicans had a good midterm year. In 2018, when Trump was president last, Democrats had a good midterm year. And that's just kind of the way it goes. It's been like that for decades. It's just this kind of fluke of American politics. People like to vote against whoever's in power. And so both sides, I've talked to Democrats and Republicans, everyone is expecting this to be a year that's favorable to Democrats. I think the big question is just how favorable it is to Democrats. Do they do 1 or 2 percentage points better than they did in 2024, or is it like 5 or 6 percentage points better, in which case they could win a ton of seats and not just 1 or 2.
Prior to this legislative session, Republicans had a supermajority in both chambers, and they were able to pass quite a bit of legislation. How has that changed since the GOP lost its supermajority in the House?
Yes, so you can look at the records of particularly when Governor Cooper, Roy Cooper was the governor, and you see that when Democrats had managed to briefly break the supermajority after the 2018 blue wave, every single one of his vetoes stood. There wasn't a single issue that Republicans were able to override his veto on, and most of them, if not all of them, they didn't even try because they didn't want the embarrassment of having lost a vote publicly. But then, as followers of North Carolina politics will remember, after 2022, Tricia Cotham, Charlotte representative, switched parties from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. That gave Republicans the supermajority power that they needed. And after that, every single one of Roy Cooper's vetoes failed. So he went from 100% success to 100% failure just based on that one seat flipping. And so, yes, right now, Democrats did manage to flip the House, flip enough seats in the House to break the supermajority in the state House. And Governor Josh Stein has vetoed over a dozen bills so far on things like guns, immigration, DEI, Duke Energy, all sorts of topics. And those have mostly been pretty recent. So we haven't yet seen how Democrats are going to be able to handle any GOP efforts to override those vetoes in this session. But previously under Roy Cooper, it was very stark. It was either 100% success or 100% failure based on whether or not there was a supermajority.
Is there any deadline for the legislature to take up these recent vetoes in terms of an override?
No, there is not. They can do these really just anytime this year that they want, and so they're on a summer vacation right now. They've basically taken the entire month of July off, and that was really when Stein issued these vetoes. It was late June, early July, and so the first test of Democrats, very thin numbers in the House is probably going to come in August. We'll see if Republicans can muster the votes, and it could be the case of there are some issues where they do give up and let Stein win with his vetoes, but there are other issues where they think that they can flip the one Democrat that they need on something, and it's kind of key that we also haven't passed the state budget yet, because that opens the door for plenty of negotiating. Republicans say, hey, we want to pass this bill on immigration, and how would you like, this amount of money for a new community center in your district? Or, does your local fire department need some new fire trucks? Or, anything, that the state can do to kind of sweeten the deal for some of these Democratic lawmakers, especially people who are, a little bit more moderate on certain issues, either, socially or business issues, or who are in competitive districts where they're going to face a tough race in 2026 and, might need to point to either, a vote on a certain tough topic or their success in bringing home the bacon for their constituents.
Well, we know you're going to be watching all of that very closely. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. For our extensive coverage of the state legislature, go to the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.